The day my mother's estate was settled. Everyone in that room already assumed they knew exactly how it would go. My younger brother had built himself into something impressive over the years. The kind of man who wore his success like a well-fitted suit and made sure you noticed. I had spent those same years doing something far less visible, something nobody put on a resume. I want to tell you what happened in that attorney's office on a rainy Tuesday in March. But to understand it, you have to understand what came before. My mother ran a small chain of diners for most of her adult life. 3 locations, all within 40 miles of our hometown in central Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Laminated menus, coffee that stayed warm all day, pie that people drove across town for. She started the first one when my brother and I were still in elementary school, and by the time we were teenagers, it was the kind of place locals had opinions about. People had proposals in Booth 7. Kids celebrated birthdays there. My mother knew the names of regulars going back 20 years. She called the diners her second family. We were her first, but honestly, some weeks, I wasn't so sure about the order. My brother's name is Damon. He's 3 years younger than me and decided early on that small-town Ohio was not his final destination. He left for college at 18 and never really came back, not in the way that counts. He got his MBA. He moved to Atlanta. He built a career in commercial real estate that paid him very well and gave him very good reasons to stay far away. He visited at Christmas when it was convenient. He called on birthdays. He sent gift cards when he couldn't think of anything else. I'm Celeste. I stayed. Not because I had no other options. I want to be clear about that. I had a degree in accounting. I had a job offer in Columbus once that paid nearly double what I was making. I turned it down the same week my mother's doctor used the phrase early-stage cognitive decline, and I watched her face crumble in a way I had never seen before. I stayed because she needed someone to stay. For 6 years. 6 years. I showed up. I helped her manage the diners when her memory started slipping. I drove her to neurology appointments 2 hours away because the local clinic had a 6-month waiting list. I handled the insurance fights, the medication adjustments, the phone calls with her accountant when she forgot what she had signed. I moved into the small house on Clearwater Road where she'd lived for 30 years, the one with the leaky back porch and the furnace that made a noise every November that I never fully trusted. I did not do this because I expected a reward. I want to say that clearly. I did it because she was my mother, and because when someone you love starts to lose themselves, piece by piece, you don't make a spreadsheet about what it's costing you. You just show up. But I also want to be honest about what it cost. I gave up a relationship that probably had real potential because I couldn't give it enough time. I watched friends move forward with promotions and vacations and houses with yards, while I was sorting pill organizers and learning what to do when someone with dementia gets confused at 2 in the morning and doesn't recognize where she is. I spent 6 years of my life in a role that nobody handed me a title for, nobody paid me for, and nobody in my family, except my mother, in her better moments, ever fully acknowledged. Damon called the house on Clearwater Road the money pit. He said it with a kind of affectionate dismissiveness that people use when they want to minimize something without seeming cruel. That old place, he'd say. Mom really ought to sell it. Get something easier to maintain. He said it like I wasn't the one maintaining it. When my mother passed away last spring, it was peaceful. She was at home, which is what she wanted. I was there. Damon flew in 2 days before, stayed 4 days, and flew back to Atlanta the morning after the funeral because he had a closing to manage. He hugged me at the airport drop-off and said, "You doing okay?" In that way, people ask when they're already reaching for their boarding pass. I said yes. I drove home. I sat in the kitchen of the house on Clearwater Road, and I cried for about 4 hours, and then I made myself a cup of tea, and I kept going. 3 weeks later, we gathered at the office of my mother's estate attorney, a man named Mr. Whitmore, who had handled her affairs for over a decade. The conference room had a long mahogany table and a window that overlooked a parking garage. There were 6 of us. Me, Damon, my mother's sister Faye, Faye's husband, my cousin Bridget, and my mother's oldest friend, a woman named Loretta, who had worked at the original diner from the very beginning. I remember thinking it felt strange to have so many people there. My mother had always kept her financial matters private. Damon arrived 10 minutes late and sat at the head of the table like he'd called the meeting. He shook Mr. Whitmore's hand with two hands, the way confident men do. He asked for water. He made a comment about the drive from the airport. He was performing the way he always did in rooms where something was being decided. I sat quietly near the window. Mr. Whitmore adjusted his reading glasses and opened a leather folder that looked like it had seen a lot of families across that table. Mrs. Alderman's estate, he began, has been carefully structured over the past several years with clear and specific intentions. The room went still. He went through the early portions methodically. Some personal items directed to Loretta, a small monetary gift to Faye, a few sentimental pieces for Bridget. Then he reached the part that filled the room with a particular kind of tension. The 3 diner locations, associated trademarks, equipment, and operational assets of Alderman Family Diners shall pass in full to Damon Alderman. Damon exhaled. He actually exhaled, slowly, like a man releasing something he'd been holding in. Then he leaned back in his chair and pressed his lips together in the practiced way of someone trying to look humble when they're not. He looked at me. The residence at 412 Clearwater Road, and all personal contents shall pass to Celeste Alderman. The room shifted. Faye looked down at the table. Loretta folded her hands. Bridget stared at the window. Damon didn't say anything for a moment. Then he smiled. Not warmly. The smile of a man who has just confirmed what he already believed about himself. Well, he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, I guess those 6 years weren't quite the investment you thought. A few people looked uncomfortable. Nobody laughed. He shook his head and looked directly at me. You put your whole life on hold to take care of her, and you got the house. He paused. Let it sit. The same house you said needed a new roof 2 years ago. My face went hot. I kept my expression still. Then he added the thing that made Loretta put her hand over her mouth. I mean, at least now you know where you'll be living, since it's not like the rest of your plan worked out. The room went completely silent. I looked at my hands on the table. My throat was tight. I was not going to cry in that room. I was not going to give him that. And then Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. He had not closed the leather folder. He was reaching into the briefcase beside his chair. There is one additional matter, he said calmly, that your mother specifically asked me to address after the primary distribution had been announced. Damon turned back toward the table. His smirk was still in place, but his eyes had changed slightly. What additional matter? Mr. Whitmore didn't answer immediately. He set a second folder on the table, thinner than the first, but with a sealed envelope clipped to the front. The envelope was pale blue, the kind you buy at a drugstore. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the front. For the room. To be opened last. Your mother left a letter, Mr. Whitmore said. She was very specific that it be read aloud in its entirety before anyone left. I felt something move through me that I couldn't name. My mother had never been a woman of many words when it came to feelings. She showed things. She didn't often say them. If she had written something long enough to call a letter, it had weight. Mr. Whitmore broke the seal carefully and unfolded several handwritten pages. My mother's handwriting, slightly uneven in the later years, but still hers. He began to read. To my family, and to the people who meant something to me. I know that what I'm about to say will surprise some of you and confirm what others already suspected. I have never been good at speeches. I am better at pie. But there are things I need you to understand, and I won't be there to say them in person. So I'm trusting Arthur to say them for me. Damon built something with his life that I admire. He worked hard, and he became successful, and I am proud of him in the way a mother is proud when her child exceeds what she imagined for them. The diners are in good hands. I know that. But I also know this. For 6 years, one of my children treated my life like it was worth showing up for. Not when it was convenient. Not when the timing was right. every single day, without being asked. Celeste drove me to appointments I was terrified of and made it feel ordinary. She stayed up with me on nights I couldn't remember where I was, and she never made me feel like a burden for it. She gave up things I knew she was giving up, and she never once held it over me. She never asked what she would receive. She only asked what I needed. Faye made a quiet sound. Loretta pressed a tissue to the corner of her eye. Damon had gone very still. Mr. Whitmore turned the page. The house on Clearwater Road is not just a house. I know what people think of it. I've heard the comments over the years. But that property has something attached to it that I have kept private, because I didn't want it to change the reason people showed up. 5 years ago, I was approached by a renewable energy developer about the land behind the house. The rear parcel, the 11 acres that back up to the creek, has significant value for a solar installation project. I engaged a land attorney. I spent a long time thinking, and then I made a decision. I transferred the development and leasing rights for that parcel into a separate trust, designated for Celeste, 2 years before I passed. The trust has already executed a long-term lease agreement with Brightfield Energy Partners. The first payment has already been deposited. The room changed. Faye looked up sharply. Bridget made a small sound. Even Loretta, who had been composed, straightened in her chair. Damon said, "What?" Mr. Whitmore set down the letter, reached into the second folder, and placed a document on the table. Then another. A lease summary, a trust statement, a letter from Brightfield Energy Partners on formal letterhead. "The lease is structured over 25 years, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice the same unhurried tone it had been all morning, with an option to extend. Annual payments are fixed with an escalation clause tied to the consumer price index." Damon grabbed the summary sheet. His eyes moved across the page fast, then slowed. His jaw shifted. "This can't be right," he said. "Quieter now." "It is," Mr. Whitmore said simply. "The annual figure." Damon stopped. He looked at the page again. "Over 25 years, this is more than the current appraised value of the diner portfolio," Mr. Whitmore confirmed. "Yes." Damon set the paper down. His hands were not entirely steady. Mr. Whitmore returned to my mother's letter. "I want to say something about the diners, too, because it wouldn't be fair not to. Damon, the business you are inheriting is real, and it is valuable. But I want you to know that it also carries the loans I took out to renovate the second location in 2019. The disputed vendor contract that my accountant is still resolving, and the property lease on the Marysville location that is up for renegotiation in 18 months with a landlord who has already signaled he intends to raise the rate significantly. These are not insurmountable problems, but they are real ones. I did not want you to walk into that building thinking it was a finished thing." Damon's face had gone the color of old concrete. He had been so certain, walking into that room, that he understood how this would go. He had done the math in his head the way people do, when they're not accounting for what they don't know. He knew what the diners were worth on paper. He had no idea what they cost. Mr. Whitmore turned to the last page of my mother's letter. "Celeste, I know you will read this later, and I know you will probably cry, and I know you will also feel guilty for feeling glad, and I want you to stop doing that right now. You gave me something that money cannot buy. You gave me the dignity of being cared for by someone who loves me. You made the last years of my life feel less frightening than they should have. That is not a small thing. That is, in my opinion, the largest thing a person can do for another person. The land is yours. Not because I was keeping score. I was not keeping score. It is yours because you are the one I trust, with a future I won't be around to see. Because you understand, more than anyone I know, that value is not always visible until you look past the surface. I love you both. I love you differently, because you are different people who gave me different things. But I want you to know, Celeste, I saw everything, every appointment, every night. Every time you chose to stay, I saw it, and I'm grateful." Mr. Whitmore folded the pages carefully and set them on the table. Nobody spoke. I don't remember deciding to cry. It just happened. Not loudly. I'm not a person who cries loudly, but I couldn't stop it, and I didn't try. Loretta reached across the table and put her hand over mine without saying anything. Damon sat very still for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The performance was gone. I didn't know about the loans, he said. Not to anyone in particular. No one responded. Eventually, people began to gather their things. Faye hugged me. Bridget squeezed my shoulder. Loretta said, "She talked about you all the time, you know, more than you'd think." I nodded, because I couldn't say anything. Damon was still at the table when I stood to leave. I didn't look at him for long, but I looked long enough. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't performing. He looked like a man sitting with a reckoning he hadn't prepared for. I walked out of that office into the gray March air and stood on the sidewalk for a minute. Across the street, someone was walking a dog. A coffee shop 2 doors down was propped open, and I could smell it from where I stood. I thought about my mother in the kitchen on Clearwater Road, her hands wrapped around her own cup, asking me what I wanted for my birthday that year. I had said I didn't need anything. She had said, "That's not what I asked." She always paid attention to the things people said without meaning to reveal. I didn't feel triumphant standing on that sidewalk. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired and sad and grateful, and like I missed her in a way that doesn't have a clean name. I felt the specific ache of being known by someone who is no longer there to know you. But underneath all of that, something else. Not victory, not satisfaction in the way people expect from a story like this. Something quieter. The feeling of having been witnessed by someone who mattered, even if they had to leave the room to say it clearly. My mother had seen every appointment, every night, every time I chose to stay. And in the end, she had made sure I knew. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking to my car. The house on Clearwater Road was waiting. The back porch still leaked. The furnace would make that noise again in November. And behind the house, on 11 acres running down to a creek, I had walked beside my whole life, something my mother had quietly made sure of was already taking root. I drove home.